Welcome back. Chapter 16. 16. Before. I didn't go to school the day after I locked my mother in her room. That night, she slept soundly, and knowing that in the morning things would be very different, I took the chance to sleep too. I had done my research, and I knew the next day or two wouldn't be easy on either of us. But I had no idea just how bad it would get. She started at 5 a.m. Dawn had arrived, the lights were gray and pale yellow, and for a moment I ignored the banging and watching the world outside my window from my bed. Eventually, she started to shout, and I dragged myself up and went to her door. The lock had held fast, and for that I was grateful. "You have to stay in there, Mom," I said. "It won't be easy, but we need to get you off the drugs. You've got everything you need." I paused, and when she didn't reply, I added, "It's just a couple of days." Silence fell on the other side of the door. I put my face close to it. I could hear her breathing, deep, heavy, dragon breaths. "Are you fucking kidding me?" Her voice was quiet, and there was humor in it, as though it was a joke that she didn't quite yet get. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. "I'm serious," I said. "If you carry on taking that stuff, you'll die." I wonder why I said those words, because if I was honest, I didn't fear or dread her death. In fact, if it happened, I would probably be better off. I would be moved to a foster home or a care facility, and people would look after me. They would cook my meals, they would wash my clothes. I wouldn't have to look over my shoulder for my mother's men wanting me to pay her debts in kind. But still, she was my mother. I had to try to help her get clean. My mind wandered then, and I allowed myself to think about the possibilities of having a real mom. One who took me to town on Saturday, who watched movies with me, and helped me with my homework. It was unimaginable. I couldn't picture it in 1,000 years. A thump on the other side of the door made me jump. I scooted backwards. "You've got water in there, plenty of bottles, and some food," I said bravely. Silence descended once more, and after a while, I retreated to my room and burrowed back under the covers. "I'm going out the window." The bellow was so deep and raw that for a moment I thought Carl was in the house. But it wasn't a man's voice, it was my mother's, and the change in her tone frightened me. I went down the stairs and slipped out the front, staring up at her window. She was there, spread eagle against the glass, one of the two fan lights open. Her left hand outside waving, her cheek pressed to the pane, her mouth stretched wide in that primal man's shout. Satisfied that she couldn't get out of the window, I went back inside. As I closed the door, I saw Kevin and his front garden in the process of taking out the rubbish. One hand, One hand held the bin lid open, and he stared up at my mother, his mouth a wide O of shock. I closed the door and trudged back upstairs. "Are you drinking your water?" I asked through the closed door. "My girl, baby girl, please don't hurt Mommy like this." Her voice had returned to normal, high-pitched and squeaky. "Mommy loves you so much. Just get her some of her stuff and we'll never talk about this, I promise," she wailed. I sat with my back to the door. That was the problem. We never talked about it. And after years of low-class drugs, she had slipped so easily into this. A smell, sweet and sickly, settled around me on the landing, and I pulled my t-shirt up to cover my mouth and nose. "Use the bucket," I said. "You bitch," she roared, a male voice back in full force. "You bloody She broke off as she retched and vomited. Later, much later, she spoke again. "My bones are breaking," she whispered. "Please help me, someone, anyone." Late that night, when it was fully dark and the street was in blackness, Carl came to the house. He had one hand on his fly, already unzipping it as I opened the door. I stepped back to let him in and jerked my head towards the stairs. For a second, his eyes widened. Hope and excitement reflected back at me as he misunderstood my meaning. As if on cue, she started again. Thin screams now, her throat sounding raw. If he cared, he would have leaped up the stairs, taking them two at a time. Instead, he turned to face me, a question mark in his eyes. From behind my back, I pulled out the knife I was clutching and held it loosely in my fist. His hands were not shaking, and for that I was my hands were not shaking, and for that I was grateful. He bit his lip, wondering if he can take me perhaps, but quickly he seemed to come to the conclusion that he wanted no parts of this. Why would he? There was nothing special about my mother apart from the fact that she was an easy target. He could get his kicks and sell his wares elsewhere. This town wasn't short of desperate, disadvantaged women. I followed him to the door. "Don't come back, Carl," I said, and this time my voice sounded low and deep and filled with the promise of violence. He moved down the path, his head low, his shoulders hunched. I watched him until he had vanished into the black night. I didn't go to school the next day, and nobody called or came around to see where I was. Nobody cared. I thought that someone might report the disturbance that she made, on and off, night and day. I watched from the window, saw a few people from the estate walking past and angling their heads upwards at the screams and curses. I held my breath when I heard sirens, and when official-looking cars drove past, but nobody came. Nobody cared. It never occurred to me that I could call the social services or the police. What did I know about safeguarding at that age? On the third night, somebody finally came. It was almost midnight, and I hadn't slept for 2 nights. When the knock sounded, my legs collapsed beneath me. I felt wetness on my face, and I swiped the tears as I pulled myself up and staggered to the door. 2 men huddled in the porch, dressed in black, their face thick and plump and red, creased in frowns. Wordlessly, I looked at them, but the gratitude I wanted to convey wouldn't come, so I stepped back and let them in. "She's up there," I said, pointing to the stairs. In silence, they thudded up to the landing, giving me long, lingering looks on the way. I sat on the bottom step, wondering where I would go, and suddenly I was so tired that I could have slept right there. Would they let me stay in my own home just for tonight? I wondered. I thought of Rebecca and how she had been given to a family who loved and cared for her. My breath caught at the excitement of potential change. Upstairs, sounds were magnified. The boat slid across, an intake of breath, short, sharp words from one of the men. My heart spun in my chest. Was she dead? I turned and crawled up the stairs, holding onto the wall for support as I turned the corner. One of the men lurched past me, shoving me out of the way as he put his arms over his mouth. "I had to do this," I said to nobody. I peered in the room. By the bed, the bucket had been overturned and liquid waste pooled on the carpet. The bedclothes were pushed to one side, the sheets yellow and damp. My mother was slumped on the floor with her back against the bed. She was naked, angry red scratches crisscrossed up and down her arms. The remaining man leaned over her, his body blocking my view of what he was doing. "I'll get you a dressing gown, Mom," I said, and hurried to my room. I snatched my own off the back of the door. I sidled back into her room, trying to hold my breath as I edged towards her. I put the gown over her thin shoulders. The curve of her back was punctuated by bumps, and I could count every part of her spine. As I touched her, her skin rose in goosebumps, and her eyes slid sideways to look at me. Here was a woman who was broken beyond repair, and yet a stone sat in my chest where my heart should have been. The man had strapped around her upper arm, blood pressure check. I thought at first, and then I smelled a familiar scent, tart like burning vinegar. It was the second man coming back upstairs carrying a tin, a tea towel wrapped around it. Ignoring me, he sat the tin down on the bedside table. From his pocket, he withdrew a needle. Swiftly, he placed it in a tin and sucked up the fluid, passing the syringe to the man next to my mother. I heard the sharp intake of breath, but lately realizing it came from me. The veins on my mother's arm stood to attention, erect, eager to receive, and I found my voice, found myself. Darting over to the man, I knocked the needle from his hand. It fell to the floor, landing in a puddle of shit. He grimaced and with thumb and forefinger picked it up. As he slid it into her arm, into the very vein that was shrieking for it, I put my hands over my face and sank to my knees. "Carl?" I said. "Carl sent you?" They didn't answer me, and my mother smiled and hissed out unintelligible words as she laid her head back against the bed. They removed the lock from the door. I watched as the paint flaked and drifted down to the floor. The first man slipped the lock into his pocket and moved past me. He paused and leaned his face very close to mine. "Leave her alone," he said, the only words he had spoken to me. Leave her alone. As though she were the victim here and this was how I should be expected to live, I slumped down into a crouch and put my head in my hands. I had to get out. I had to forge a life for myself that was as far away from here as possible, because there was no fixing this. The situation wouldn't get better, no matter what I did. 2 more years, then I would be 16 and I could legally leave. I could leave right now, I realized, but I wasn't stupid. With no money and nobody to run to, I would end up on the streets. Eventually, I would become the woman on the floor in front of me. 2 more years. It was the early hours of the morning now, and I had to go to school today. I had to pick up my grades, work really, really hard so I had a chance of getting into a university. Uni life cost money, but scholarships didn't. And if anyone needed a scholarship, it was me. If anyone deserved a scholarship, it was me. I washed my school uniform and draped it over a radiator. I checked the gas meter. It had 50 pence in it, which should be just enough to dry my clothes. In the meantime, I filled the bowl with bleach and water and returned to my mother's bedroom. I scrubbed the carpet, the pungent stench of feces mixed with bleach making my eyes water. The chemicals turned the carpet white, but I didn't care. I liked it, a single clean spot in an otherwise rotten environment. The work became soothing, mechanical, and in my mind, I dreamed of Cambridge, of Durham, Leeds, or Oxford. I didn't know what they looked like or what subject I would study. I just knew I needed to get to one of those places. She slumbered on, happy in her heron dreams while I cleaned her shit from the carpet. I scored and scrubbed, focused now, no longer trying to save her, no longer wasting my time trying to change her. I just needed to escape. It was all about me now, the future I deserved. That's the end of chapter 16. Wow. This girl grew up in some mess, and the perspective of how she grew up in it is like awareness to me. Like, I can't help but think of how I was raised and then think about how other people were raised. Like, some things are worse than other situations, and I can see how she is kind of crazy. But I've been thinking, I don't know if I mentioned this before. Sorry, my apologies. My eyes is itching a lot because, the trees are out. So if you see me rubbing my eyes, that's what it is. I've been thinking this whole time, this story that I just read seemed like it is Anna, right? What if it's Paula? because it don't really mention the girl's name in the, this story. It just say before, unless I missed something. And I'm trying to think. Paula had degrees, right? But she didn't do anything with it because she's with Tommy. So I don't know if y'all thinking the same lines. I'm thinking like it seemed like it's Anna's story, but it might be Paula's. What y'all think? I don't know. It could be. And again, I'm still rooting for Paula. That's the end of this chapter. I shall see you in the next chapter. Bye for now.